use the word style. Learning is one thing and only one thing. And so like a light switch, you're either doing it or you're not doing it. And so there is no stylistic approach to learning. It's not that type of thing. There aren't more than one way to get to the same. There's not more than one way to learn something. It doesn't make any sense in any abstract way of thinking about it. If your goal is to learn mathematics, there isn't like a billion ways of arriving at understanding mathematics. There's just one way. And so I think the reason there is a confusion as to, or people are prone to believe that there are learning styles, is because of our, come on in, don't worry. You live in this house too. It's like, I gotta walk around in eggshells when he's talking. It's a misdirection of our focus. Yeah. Learning is a process. And so by process, I mean like a series of actions with their resulting reactions, environmental reactions, right? That happen in an order. So steps, right? And so people who believe in a learning style, what they're doing is focusing on one step of this process, believing this is learning. So it would be the equivalent of focusing on the engine of a car and believing you are looking at the entire car. The reason we can fall into this trap is pretty simple to understand. First, learning is an abstract concept. A car is a concrete concept. So you already know you're not looking at an entire car when you're looking at the engine, because you can see the entire car at every moment up until you start focusing on the engine. Well, you can't do that with learning. Learning transpires across time. A car doesn't. You're either looking at the car or not. And so you can believe that you're looking at, another reason is because, an engine is an incredibly important part of the car, as is every single step an incredibly important part to learning, right? So if you could believe you're looking at learning by focusing on one step in the process of learning, because that step is crucial to the process of learning. You take the step out, learning doesn't occur anymore. So there is this, I don't even know what word to call it, but it's you start believing, like there's a saying, like the blind man looking at the elephant. You start believing that you are looking at the entire picture. You start believing you see the entire picture from only one perspective. There has to be, it's so easy to fall into that there has to be something that describes that, like some psychological phenomena that describes that, but I don't know what it is. So people who believe in a learning style believe that because whatever step of learning they're focusing on, it's such an important part to learning, as it should be if it designates it as if it constitutes a step. It's such an important part that they believe that's it. And they can't see the rest of the process at any given moment in time, since it transpires across time. And so they just this is it. This is my learning style, right? You just come to this belief that this is your learning style. But there is no learning style for each individual. Can't happen. It's unnatural, and it doesn't make any sense. And you can't see evidence of it anywhere in nature. I wish I could go into depth as to why it doesn't make sense, but just no one. I think one person tried. I think that my wife, you just barely saw pass by. I think she tried once. I'm trying to recall what the argument was about. I'll try to remember what it is, but before I go into more detail as to what learning is, I have to first talk about why this is even important. Why does it matter that I define what the difference is between a learning, why I'm even doing this, right? Why can't people just believe that they're learning their own style, right? Their own way. Why must we have a concrete definition of learning? The easiest response to that would be because if we don't understand as a population of people what learning is, then we won't be able to remedy problems that currently exist and will exist in the future. Problems with learning that currently or will exist in the future. It's called diagnosing something, right? Just like the car, you can't diagnose a car properly if you don't have a comprehensive understanding of the car. If all you can see and all you believe the car is the engine, all you can diagnose when there's a problem with the car, if the problem doesn't lie in the engine, then your diagnosis will never be accurate and will never lead to a solution. It's the same thing with this. Currently, and these are big claims I'm making, but currently the perspective of learning that allows us to believe that there's learning styles is the perspective that completely dominates all of academia that I'm currently aware of. I'm not deep in academia, but I'm deep enough to know that there is nothing that I'm aware of that suggests that there is only one learning style. And so all of academia believes that there are multiple learning styles. And please, if you will contradict me if you can, and that's awesome. And so academia is trying to diagnose problems with learning that plague society, right? But they are trying to diagnose these problems from the perspective of the engine of a car, not from the perspective of the car, right? They're focusing on one part of learning, not the entire process. And so the academia will never be able to diagnose or help society learn so long as they believe that there are different learning styles. Different learning styles can only exist from a fundamentally flawed perspective of learning. And so people who don't find their learning issues remedied by academia, they go to capitalism. And capitalism also, I haven't studied capitalism enough to say this, but I'll make a claim and see what types of responses I get. But capitalism also has a fundamentally flawed perspective of learning, and so I would say the way capitalism deals with learning is with definitely with self-help books, right? Self-help books. That's capitalism's take on learning. And then there's academia's take on learning, which is consumption, so reading a lot of stuff. And then there's like marriages between capitalism and academia, where you have like I don't know. So I guess the self-help book is a marriage of like of that because it's a book. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to talk a little bit about so I'm gonna describe what learning is, and then what part of learning would most people call their learning style. So learning is a process that takes an individual who is a learner, or someone who is ignorant, who is incapable of something, doesn't have a skill, must acquire a skill. Whatever you want to call it, needs to speak a certain language, needs to perform a certain way, needs to be able to interact with a certain type of person, needs to occupy a certain space in society. Takes a person with a need and alters their internal structure so that they can function in a way where that is no longer a need, where that is now being fulfilled by their very own actions. Right? So it's, put it in easier terms, it's a identity altering mechanism, learning. At any given moment in your life, you are capable of doing and coexisting with a limited number of people. Learning is what allows you to coexist with an increasingly more diverse number of people, but also at the same time, by allowing you to communicate, to coexist with a said group of people, you may have to cut ties with another group of people, etc. Learning is the process that takes care of this. Okay. So the classic example of learning is you're born into this world as an infant, and you can coexist with no one, right? Luckily, nature is structured so that you don't have to be able to coexist with anyone and still survive. Instincts kick in, father, mother instincts kick in, and we take care of our kids, of our infants, just one way care, until they learn how to coexist with us. Learning takes care of that. So learning is a process that allows an infant to go from complete inability to coexist to being able to coexist. And the first skill that allows that is language. So that's why that's the first thing that we learn is language. And so this is the first piece of evidence to go against a learning style, because there are not multiple ways that infants learn their native language. This has been shown by academia, and that's what's kind of ironic. Is there have been countless studies to show that every single infant, they can't say it's for every single country, but enough to just suggest of the entire population, all infants all over the world learn their native languages the exact same way. There are no two ways, right? So whatever infants are doing to learn their native languages, that's learning, and only that. Okay, and anything that's different is a deviation from that. And so what is an infant doing to learn their native language? What I believe it to be is they are first acquiring the sounds that compose their language, and then they're organizing these sounds into words, and then into sentences, right? Into long strings of thought, etc. So what's happening on a procedural level? So the process is, this first step is the first goal is to acquire the sounds, right? And the way they do this is by consuming authentic. Consuming the language from an authentic source. So that's from their parents. So hearing it, right? They reach a point where they have since everything that you learn has a predictive element to it. There is a cyclical nature to it where you end up repeating yourself a lot, right? They end up consuming these sounds that are being repeated over and over again to the point where they are able to predict what the parents are going to say in their head. And once they're able to predict what the parents are going to say in their head, they start to replicate it with their mouth, right? And so that ushers in the second stage, which is production. And you can never produce something accurately in the beginning. There's always a stage of just massive failure, right? And so this acquisition and production kind of feed off of each other. Consumption and production feed off of each other. You consume you consume language in this authentic environment until you believe you can produce it. You produce, but fail at producing it, because that's the nature of learning, is failure. And then you learn from these failures to fine-tune your productions, or to acquire, to improve your consumption, which then allows you to improve your production. So the first stage is consumption. The second stage is production. And then you have produced something correctly by the reaction you get from your environment. There is this recognition of what you're producing. It comes in different forms, but they're all categorically good. It feels you get a good vibe from your environment. You get a good reaction from your environment, good emotions. And when you get that, and so that it's in the form of, I recognize what you're saying, meaning our parents are, they hear us produce sounds that are similar to what they say. And so they see us produce like them, and so they react to us with positive recognition reactions, right? So when that happens, muscle, what do you call it? A memory, I guess you could say, is formed, where we have a positive experience coupled with a specific structure of our muscles, with our tongue whatever the muscles are used to produce that, whatever muscles we use to produce the sound that was recognized, right? And so we are most likely to produce that sound again in the future over sounds that were not recognized by our parents, right? So that's the third stage, which is remembering. So the first is consumption, second is production, and third is remembering, right? And then we just keep repeating that cycle. So we continue consuming things we don't remember, producing things we don't remember with what we remember, which then allows us to remember more and more complex things. So we keep building off of memories we're making, right? And so that is that is learning. Consumption, production, and then remembering. I don't like the remembering stage yet. It's I felt like I had to explain too much in between the production and remembering stage to justify the title, the title remembering for that stage. But I'll deal with that for right now. And so when people are saying that there's different learning styles, what's happening is, for example, when they say I can only remember things visually, I can only learn things visually, right? What they are saying is I can only I need to consume a concept visually before I can remember it. But they are completely skipping the production part. All they're talking about is the consumption part. Because it doesn't make sense. If you could say I can only learn visually, or I can only learn physically, from the perspective of this process of learning that I described, and then it means you can only learn things that are physical, meaning you can only consume things that are physical, which means you can only produce things physically, and which then allows you to only remember things physically. And that makes no sense, because people who claim that they can only learn things physically have learned non-physical things like colors, right? And they've learned to recognize certain notes in music. People that say I learn visually. It's the same thing. From learning, then what they're saying is I can only consume things visually, then produce things visually, and which then allows me to remember only visual things. This doesn't make any sense, because there are plenty of things you are learning that has nothing to do with your visual system at all. So the only way for the learning style thing to exist is if you're only focusing on one step of this process, which is, and in this case, I think it's the consumption part. It means people feel more comfortable consuming things visually or physically or auditorily, right? They feel more comfortable that way. That's it. But they're not learning just by consuming things visually. And the whole thing doesn't make any sense anyways, because at no point is a human being consuming anything with only one of their senses. We're using every sense available to us, which is always, it's much more than just the 5 or 6 you want to say either. It's just we're using everything in this process of learning, right? So there is no such thing as only visually learning. You're visually and auditorily and physically learning at the same time. All your senses at the exact same time. So the only way that this learning style idea could even exist, like come into creation and take shape and be believed to exist and spread throughout a community, is if that community was detached enough from reality that whatever it was doing is no longer learning. It was just its own thing. And the only types of communities where these weird theories can actually come to existence and be adopted by wide number of people are like universities and schools and stuff like that. Those communities are sufficiently detached from reality where this is possible, where you could believe you're learning by focusing on just your visual system. When in reality, you're just consuming a lot of visual material and then being tested on how well you remember it with a artificially, that doesn't represent reality type of test, that doesn't require you to produce anything meaningful. And so if we want to speak of learning in a way that makes sense to me, we have to speak of learning in a way that makes sense for every single human being under the sun. And that's why we have to start with, that's why our explanation has to start with infants, start from the origin of humans, which is infants. So a multiple style theory of learning makes no sense if you start with infants, because they're not doing it. No infant is learning language visually. I was testing my brain's limits there, but I think I survived. I'll check it out.